Okay, welcome everybody to the 2022 Faith and Fellowship Book Festival. We're so excited you're here. And our special speaker tonight, we're really excited to have Patricia Raybon. Patricia is an award-winning Colorado author, an essayist, a novelist who writes stories of faith and mystery as they intersect race. Her debut 1920s mystery novel, All That Is Secret, is a Parade Magazine Fall 2021 Mysteries We Love section, a masterpiece on PBS Best Mystery Books of 2021 selection, as recommended by best-selling authors, and Stephen Curry's March 2022 pick for his literary book club. So welcome, Patricia.
Thank you so much. I am in Colorado, everybody. So if you're on the East Coast, I'm 2 hours ahead, and we are on Kairos time. We're in good time, in the fullness of time, right, my friends? And so I'm delighted to be with you today. And Cindy, I think I have your permission to just dive in, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, first, I want to thank Cindy and Yolanda and Paige, Scott, Chelsea, Julie, Sandra, and everybody at the Faith and Fellowship Book Festival, and all of you who joined us today to explore this topic. My topic is why story matters. Or as I told someone last night, the better title might be why your story matters and what authors and readers are supposed to do about that. But first, a show of hands, any book lovers in the house? I always ask that question. And also, what's your favorite fiction? Any fiction readers in the house? One or two? On the nonfiction side, memoir, history, biography, devotional reading, Bible studies. Back to fiction, does anybody read sci-fi? A few, or romance, or admit to reading romance. Or here's one, everybody. What about horror? Stephen King. Oh my gosh, a few Stephen King readers. Okay, we're not mad at you. But the context for me and my question, and for that question I just asked, has been my humble Colorado mystery, as Cindy mentioned. And I'm going to share my screen as I talk about this, so bear with me. You know how that works. Just 1 second. I see it there. Why isn't it opening up? Just 1 second, everybody. This whole share your screen businesses. There we go. Let's see from the beginning. Okay, are you seeing it? Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you're seeing it? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. Well, as I said, the context for my question has been this this history mystery, I'll call it, that I wrote called All That Is Secret. I completed this first of Annalise Spain mysteries during the pandemic summer of 2020. And it quickly got sold and published, making it my first fiction, something I never imagined I'd see because I am a journalist by training. I started my career as a newspaper reporter at the Denver Post. Look how young I look. That was like 1,000 years ago. And then I moved over to the Scripps Howard newspaper in Denver, the Rocky Mountain News. and then went back to the Post. My last newspaper job was editing the Sunday Contemporary magazine at the Post. That was the Sunday Features magazine. And then after 12 years in the news business, I taught journalism on the tenure track at the University of Colorado, go Buffs, as we say here in my state, for 15 years, where I learned that the first rule of gaining tenure at a university is publish or perish. And I'm sure many of you on the call have heard that phrase before. So to get tenure, I wrote my first nonfiction book while I was teaching at the J School. It's called My First White Friend, Confessions on Race, Love, and Forgiveness. It's a racial forgiveness memoir. And so my dean said, this is not going to work. It's not about journalism. But it was what I had felt led to write about. And so I wrote it. It did get published. And I ended up on the Today Show with this book. And I got tenure. So this started my my book writing life. But I'd also been blessed to write several nonfiction books and also still do a ton of freelance article writing. And so when we get to the Q&A, some of you may have some questions about how all of that has worked. This all sounds good, but nothing I've written has drawn me into community as the writing of a little mystery novel. Here I am at something called the Fiction Readers Summit in May. It was in May in Grand Rapids. These are the authors who were invited to that event. And then these are the people who showed up. They were about, most of the people who showed up, about 100 people from all over the country and Canada who just love fiction. I asked earlier if anybody loves fiction. These people are die-hard fiction readers. And then when I got back to Denver, I was blessed to meet with the Delta Deers of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, one of the historically Black sororities. This was the older members of the Denver chapter. And then a few days after that, I was in Castle Rock, Colorado for a book club, a Monday night book club with these nice ladies. And then I did a talk at a church. This was Montview Presbyterian Church in Denver. And book clubs come in all sizes. This is a small group in New Orleans, Louisiana. And they had read my little mystery novel, and they wanted to come and talk about that. So in the middle of all of this, I was invited by Christianity Today magazine to interview a pastor. His name is Claude Atcho, who writes about books, also writes about books and reading. His latest book examines reading Black classics like Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, those kind of people. And I mention that because he said to me that reading books and getting together in groups to talk about stories is actually the way we read best. First of all, we're together, then we're processing and debating and discussing these books. He talked about the first time he read Richard Wright's book, Native Son. And I think he was a freshman in college. And he said, the book just rocked my world. But the only downside is that I had nobody to read it with, nobody to talk about it with. And so that really struck with me that the stories are something we enjoy together. And I keep hearing that from other groups. This is the first group I met with for about this mystery novel, Colorado Press Women. And it was a group I had been a member of a long time ago. And every time I would go to book clubs or to do a book talk, I was hearing the same question. Not just how did you write this mystery story, but why? What led you to it? And as I was thinking about it, my friends, I said to myself, this is a question that all of us at some point ask ourselves. We ponder the story. What's my story? And what's the story behind my story? Because when we ask that, it forces us to confront why we're telling it, but also who we are. So two things fascinated me about this. First was that all this meeting and gathering and talking and asking, who I am and what am I about? What do I know about myself? Existed in the world of fiction because of a fictional character, somebody who only exists visually on the cover of a book and mentally, emotionally in the hearts and minds of the author and the people who are reading it. This isn't a real person, but what that person has done is answer a call to take on a problem. My husband asked me one time, what is story? And so he went on his phone and he was reading, a definition that said, a story is a narrative with episodic events. And, he was reading this formal definition. And so I said, you know what, Dan, I think the story is about somebody in trouble who's trying to get out of it. And when that person answers the call to address that problem, then the story starts. And we as readers, we love that, whether it is memoir, history, biography, or a fictional story. So in my mystery, my character gets a cryptic telegram, as a friend said, there's no other kind of telegram but cryptic, to come home to Denver and help solve the murder of her estranged father. In fact, she's not even sure how she feels about her dead father, but she answers the call of the story and she comes home. And that choice that she makes gets the story moving. Of course, we call that in writing, we call that the inciting incident. But because of her action as a protagonist, it gets us moving to come together and meet and talk, just like we are here together today. And, we want to talk about a proactive person who says yes to addressing a tough problem. And so Jesus, since this is faith and fellowship, I get to talk about Jesus at this book talk. Yay. Told these parables about the same kind of people. So there was a certain man who had two sons, right? And all of us will recognize that as the parable of the prodigal son, who the man who had two sons who might have looked like this, or like this, or like this. Either way, he's one person with one really good problem. So what we in writing conferences, we talk about, the really good problem that informs our writing. Joseph Campbell calls this the monomyth, the hero's journey. And it compels us because we know instinctively that this one person's story is going to offer a universal lesson for us all. Because one person showed up and said, yeah, I'm going to do something. So we have the parable of the sower, which is about one farmer who went out to sow his field. Or the parable of the one friend who has a friend who comes at midnight asking for his 3 loaves of bread. And this is how this person looks when somebody wakes you up at midnight asking for 3 loaves of bread. Or the woman who had 9 coins and celebrates when she finds the 10th one that was lost. Or the merchant hunting for the pearl of great price. Story matters because it gives us that one protagonist, that leading figure in a contest, because there's going to be a battle. And the Greek word for that is agonia. And indeed, in a story, there is going to be a battle. There's going to be a fight. For my novel, it took about the 3rd or 4th editing pass before my lead character finally began to stand tall enough in the situation to lead a battle. I'm an introvert by nature, with my little soft voice, grew up in Colorado. And so by nature, I'm not that tough kind of risk-taking protagonist type person. So I had to do several editing passes before my lead character started to take on that nature herself. In her case, a battle to figure out who killed her dead father, whether she cared about him or not. She's still battling that question. So as readers, we need a protagonist like that to grab us off the couch, so that with enough courage that we have that same courage to look at our own lives. And that one person will bring us together to talk about it all. And that's the first reason why stories matter. They get us up and out and gathering and connecting and debating. Here's Black Men's Book Club in Chicago. They're reading How the Word is Passed. And an Asian Woman's Book Club. Here's a book club at Duke University called Crack a Book with colleagues. And they are all reading this book called What We Owe. And here is another group from that same campus. Looks like they're reading a fictional story called The Music Shop. These kids are reading Kwame Alexander's basketball story called Crossover. It's about a young basketball player who is the age of these, a little bit older than the age of these children, but it's written in verse, as in spoken word. And so it's been very popular with children. Or this band book club, which was started by these high school girls in Austin, Texas. Looks like one of the books they're reading is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. So all of these people coming together to talk essentially about a protagonist who answered a call, and that's a lot of power for one character. I guess that's the first, the point I just compels me. So as for the reason I think that Jesus told his parables, he knew that they would bring together we who believe to talk it all over. I was teaching, blessed to teach Sunday school at my church in October. And one of the stories we talked about was the call when Jesus calls us to rest. And so one of the stories I told was the Mary and Martha story. And I thought about it. It's not a parable, but it's a story that if you've been in church for 5 minutes, you've heard of it. But still, early on a Sunday morning, all these people showed up to wrestle with this story they've heard 1,000 times, maybe to think, maybe there's something I missed the other time. There'll be something in this story that I get out of it. And stories have that power. And they get us talking about our humanity. They get us seeing each other and learning something new about another person. maybe somebody we didn't know before. Well, that mattered to me because of when and how I grew up. I grew up under Jim Crow segregation. I was at a talk the other day and I said, I didn't just grow up in the 60s, I grew up in the 50s, and they still let me in here. And during that time, during that era, that was the law of the land. That was the legal law of the land. And in my part of the country, in Colorado, there was de facto segregation. So even though it wasn't on the books, it was the spirit of the city at that time. And I say it this way, that until you have had to drink out of a segregated water fountain, as I have, do you deeply understand the message it intended to send was that your Black life really does not matter. It doesn't count. You may remember this, have seen this picture of Elizabeth Eckford, one of the Little Rock Nine who integrated Little Rock High School in Arkansas. She's only 15 years old in this photo. That year I was 8. Or when these 4 little girls were killed in the church bombing in Birmingham, I was 14, as 2 of the other girls were 14 years old too. The youngest was 11. Or when Emmett Till was lynched in Money, Mississippi, he was 14 years old. I was 5. I share all this because growing up, it seemed to me that there was no place safe to be who I was. As a little Black girl who couldn't find a safe place to be because people weren't held accountable for these horrible things. Many things were off limits. If you were a certain background or race, there were whites only housing covenants. Here's one in my city in Colorado in a Park Hill neighborhood where somebody's saying, great danger, Negroes are moving in. And so my family spent our time in 2 places that felt safe to us. One was at home. I'm sharing this because when people said, why did you write your story? I had to think about why did you write your novel? And I realized I could only answer it unless I looked at my own story. So here I am with my sister at the house we grew up in Denver. My sister's on the right. My sister Loretta, she's now Dr. Loretta. And I always say, even then she's a licensed clinical psychologist. And even then she looked like Dr. Loretta. And the disheveled child sitting next to her is me, who turns out to be a writer. But anyway, we were there at home. We spent a lot of time in our home, in our neighborhood, and at our church. And we spent so much time at church. I used to say I almost grew up on a pew until this lady said to me, "You did?" And I told her not literally, but we spent a lot of time in church, where the men were strong and silent and brave. Here's my dad with the blue arrow under him, and that was my dad's demeanor in the world, but also at home. When I look at these pictures, my friends, I see the stress on the faces of these Black men of that time. And I leaned into that as I was working on my fictional story, leaned into the stress that they walked in day to day. And the women kept hope alive. And here's my mom there. And these are the women who raised me, who taught me that the world may say that my life doesn't matter. You can't drink out of the same water fountain I'm drinking out of. You can't stay in a hotel. When we go on vacations, we have to go to the neighborhood. My dad would have to ask around. We have to find the Black neighborhood. My dad would have to ask around, does anybody have a rooming house? Or does anybody keep lodgers? And then that's where we would stay until we got where we were going, because we couldn't stay in hotels, and those things were closed to us. And so, but these women said, your life may not matter to other people, but it matters to us. And more important, it matters to God. And that is the reason, that's the faith, that's the reason I wrote a Christian mystery. Because of, I have a faith context for my life. I didn't understand it at first, but I wrote this story to put a face on a young woman of color. She's a fan of Sherlock Holmes, trying to figure out her life and her faith and her place in a place that said that she did not count. But make it entertaining enough, hopefully, that people would read it and gather and talk about it because of what she chose to do. And then most of all, identify with her. I have been so humbled to go to a book club where all the members are white, but the people are genuinely concerned about my lead character who is Black. You know, what's she gonna do? What's gonna happen next? When's the next book coming out? A story has the power to do that. I could talk all day about discrimination and prejudice, and I have done a lot of that kind of writing, nonfiction writing. But I'm amazed that a story, somebody who might not read one of my nonfiction essays on racial reconciliation will sit down and read a whole novel about a young Black woman trying to solve a mystery, trying to solve a crime. And so I'm just amazed at that power that a little story has in that way. And I've seen it play out time after time as I've been blessed to go around and talk about the story that I wrote. So it's made a difference to me because as a child, growing up, I didn't know how to say that the nature of the racism, that the systemic racism that we experience, I didn't know how to say there's something wrong with this paradigm. I didn't know how to say that as a child. Instead, what I said is there must be something wrong with me. And so I wrestled with that in nonfiction books. But in a story, I could create a character who says, wait a minute, there was nothing wrong with me, and there's nothing wrong with you, the person who's reading this. And so let's, dive into this story and see what we discover. Stories invite us to do that, to take that deep dive, to empathize with the protagonist, and then ultimately with not only with ourselves, but with others. And so I just celebrate story because of that. So in The Kite Runner, I don't know if any of you have read that, Khaled Hosseini asked the question of himself and his readers, is there a way to be good again? That's the question that he wrestles with in that story, which is about a man who as a child betrayed a friend. Or The Great Gatsby. F. Scott Fitzgerald, probably you read that in high school or somewhere along the line. He asked, is one social class really greater than another? Or in Victor Hugo's novel, Les Miserables, he asked through the life of his lead character, Jean Valjean, can a criminal be redeemed? And of course, you know, this story has been made into a musical, and it's been dramatized on television and in movies, and because the question is so compelling, the question of the story ask a question that's so compelling. Or Charles Dickens ask in A Tale of Two Cities, what's a life worth? You know, I mean, these are big questions that, you know, characters and the readers wrestle with. Toni Morrison asked in her books, what's a Black life worth? James Baldwin asked the same questions. Viola Davis in her memoir is asking herself, in her memoir, Finding Me, is simply asking, who am I? And then in the course of asking that, we get to ask the same kind of questions. If we were not on Zoom, if we were in a room together, I would have a way to ask you what novel has challenged you to ask a life-changing question, and maybe in our Q&A we can get to that. I had to ask these kind of questions because who I am doesn't fit into a typical box. I'm a bit of a nerd. I love clergy mysteries. I don't know if anybody on the call likes clergy mysteries. I just love them. This is the Father Brown series that's on PBS, Masterpiece of Mysteries. I love these kinds of stories because they wrestle with spiritual questions. So here's Father Brown. I love the Grantchester Mysteries on PBS. It's about a vicar and his best friend who's a policeman, and they solve mysteries together. And this one was about a rabbi, the Rabbi Small Mysteries that were popular, back in the 80s, I guess. All the titles were a day of the week. And I enjoyed them so much. And of course, and then the other thing is, I love the Golden Age mysteries. Here's Agatha Christie. I confess to you, I've read a lot of Agatha Christie with her Miss Marple character and her Hercule Poirot character. Sherlock Holmes. I have read a gazillion of his stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I love mysteries because there's a problem that's going to be solved in general. It's going to be solved by the end of the story, and justice will be done. And that's not what happens in real life. That certainly isn't what I've seen, what I've observed happens. So I love that about mysteries, that the puzzle gets solved, justice will be done. Even when the bad guy is a city. So here's, I recently read this book called Bad City about LA style corruption at the University of Southern California in and around Pasadena. So for my book, I could think about these things because Colorado had a built-in villain in the form of the Ku Klux Klan. And if you know anything about downtown Denver, this is 17th Street in downtown, and this was in the early 1920s, and you can see that from the make and models of the cars. And this was when the Klan ruled the roost in Colorado. That was one of their marches. They met on Monday nights at Table Mesa, just outside of Denver. A third of white Colorado men were dues-paying Klan members, from the governor on down, police chiefs, mayors, jury commissioners, school board members. There's a lot of pressure on men at the time, on people at the time to join the Klan. Colorado had the second highest Klan membership per capita in any state. This first highest was in Indiana. And I've heard from so many people who said, I didn't even know, I never knew this was happening in Colorado. And there were women in the Klan in Colorado. And these pictures are from the Denver Public Library. And then the church had from the beginning this curious relationship with the Klan. So so all of these things were just good, rich material to try to wrestle into a book. And, you know, my book isn't about the Klan, but it's the background threat in the story. My little amateur detective has to think about this big threat that's out there in the world. So in her world. So I also wrote my story because I love stories. I was raised on stories, raised on the stories of the Bible, the acts of the disciples, the miracles of Jesus. I love what Robert McKee says about stories, that they're not just these narratives. Stories are equipment for living. They teach us things. And that he says we go to fiction not to escape life, but to find it. So I'm going to quickly move through the rest of my slides so we'll have time to chat. But these are some of the books that I read to try to get up to speed on writing a format I hadn't tried before, which was fiction. I loved what I learned. James Scott Bell talks about story beats, B-E-A-T-S. The first one he calls the disturbance, that tells the reader that there's trouble brewing. And readers want to know that from the beginning. What's the trouble that this book is going to wrestle with? Another beat I just love, he calls the doorway of no return. And that's when the lead character has to make a hard choice. And when that character makes that choice, there is no turning back. And I don't know if any of you remember Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You have to be a certain age to remember that story. But this is when they're running from the bad guys. And the only way they can get away is to leap off the side of this mountain. And so Paul Newman's character can't figure out why his colleague won't jump. And then he figures out he can't swim and he starts laughing. He says, "Are you crazy? The jump will kill you anyway." And then they leap. And so you'll see that if you know you're looking for it, you'll see that doorway of no return, that story beat in a lot of fiction, because it's a choice, a moment of choice, and the leap psychologically, you're leaping out away from your old life into something new, and so it's a really strong story beat, and it invites all of us to think about the times we've had to make choices like that too. Here's one in the same kind of situation in The Fugitive. If anybody saw that movie, Harrison Ford's character is running from Tommy Lee Jones, the police guy, and he's there right at this water reservoir facility, and Tommy Lee Jones says, "Get on your knees." Metaphorically, he literally gets into the prayer position, but instead of allowing himself to be handcuffed, he leaps. And so if you look for that beat, you'll see it in a lot of fiction. Another one I love is the mirror moment, where the character has to think, "Gosh, I'm doing the wrong thing. I've got to do something better, or I'm not going to survive this." So anyway, I loved learning those story beats. I was going to tell you about Anne Frank. the point being that she knew that writing changes the world. And she says the nicest part is being able to write down all my thoughts and feelings. Otherwise, I would suffocate. She even had a moment of doubt. And we have doubt in our lives as writers because people are more successful than we are. Reviewers, people on Amazon say horrible things about our books. A lot of reasons why writers have doubt, but no weapon formed against us will prosper. And so as writers, we just have to dive in and keep working on it. So some nice things happened to my book. Parade Magazine mentioned it, and some of these other people that Cindy mentioned at the beginning. And then you guys, Steph Curry picked it for his book club, if you're a basketball fan. And a friend of mine said, I didn't even know he had a book club, but he did pick it. And that was such a lovely surprise. And then last week, or 2 weeks ago, it was nominated for a Christie Award as the first novel. And we'll see what happens. The ceremony is later this month. So the best thing, though, before we close, is that I learned to understand who my readers are for this book. I didn't recognize at the beginning that my reader is not this nice young lady or this nice young man, but that my readers are older and they are women. And I never thought of myself as writing women's fiction, but these are the people who were, are and continue to read my book. And this first novel of mine. And I'll skip through those things. The point being that this whole process, I understand now, is not about me or even this protagonist that a novelist gives her readers. That ultimately, my friends, and I love to hear your ideas on this, ultimately, this work that we're doing glorifies God. And, I think of that scripture that says, let your light so shine. I used to not like to come and talk on Zoom calls and go to writing workshops and stuff. I thought, oh, I don't want the spotlight on me. But the scriptures say, let your light so shine before men and women that they see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. And that for me is the ultimate reason why story matters. Because if we work on it and keep trying and get it out in the world, ultimately the trying that we've done, the trying that you do to write your story, the willingness that you do to put some words on paper and then take the courage and the risk to send it out in the world, that glorifies God. So the second of this mystery book, that was an amen moment, by the way. If there's an amen corner in the Zoom call, that was the one. So the second of this mystery novel is in the can. Double the Lies is the second one. And it's due out on February the 7th, if you're taking notes on your calendar, 2023. And now it's starting to look like a series, and I'm so humbled by that. And I thank everybody who's enjoyed discovering this series and is starting to read it. So that's what I came to say. And I thank you very much for that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then if anybody out there, and now we can talk. I guess that's what we say. So if you have,
Thank you, Patricia.
Yes.
We really appreciate that. We do have some questions in the chat, and I'll look over those for you. But we have a lot of people in the group who do like to read mysteries. A lot of people that read a lot of everything, which would describe myself too.
Yeah.
And you and I share a lot of taste in TV series, mysteries TV series, because I think I've watched all of them that you mentioned.
Yes.
Maybe a lot of us did during the pandemic. We had to have something to keep us busy. Brian asked a question about your readers groups, how you found them. And before you answer that question, we did have another author answer that question in the chat. And she said, Paula says that she found book clubs by posting the question on Facebook, by calling churches in my town and asking if they have a group, and just keeping my eyes peeled. So did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I second that. I also had reached out to every library district in Colorado because I did write a Colorado mystery. And I emailed every bookstore on the Front Range in Colorado. And so by connecting with people in those places where readers go, those places started to recommend my book to other groups. And so, you know, they would put my book on their book club list. And but that was about making the effort to build relationships with people. Books and reading and publishing, it is so much about relationships. It's just like you're the person who answered that question, you know, reaching out to churches. And then when I would post on my social media that I had been to a book club, you know, with the photo of it, then I would get more people contacting me saying, well, I saw that you went to so-and-so book club. Would you come to ours? And so it's all that combination of things. I say it this way, Cindy, there's two things happening in the writing life. The first is the writing. And then the second is being an author. They're very different things. And being an author is what challenges so many of us who happen to be introverts who write it. But that is getting out there and introducing ourselves and connecting, saying hello, you know, just that saying hello to people and reaching out. And it was slow going at first. At first, there were no bookstores in Colorado that were carrying my book. Plus, we were in a pandemic. And then there's like this big ship started to turn, and people started to hear about it and tell others about it. And so, if those of you who on this call who are writers, our challenge is, even if it's just one thing a day or one thing a week, doing something as an author to tell the world about what the Lord has poured into you to write. And then over time, there is a response to that.
That's great advice. Denise has a question. Denise is one of our authors to be on a panel later. What was the hardest part and easiest part of going from nonfiction to fiction? You mentioned that you were a journalist first.
Well, the easiest part was that as a journalist, I've been on deadline ever since I got out of college. That's how I put it. So there was that comfort level with the work of the writing. That's the only thing I've ever done, write or teach writing. But fiction is another whole other world. It's another animal. And I was very aware that I didn't know much about it. I think this mystery novel is a pretty good first try. It's a debut. But fiction is immersive. It's very immersive writing. And you know, news writing is quick, fast, who, what, when, why, where. This writing takes the reader deep into the story, deep into the characters, deep into the problem. I talked a lot with my sister, my psychologist sister, about motivations. mystery, a murder mystery is not about the murder. It's about the motivation for it. And so, I had to just go in a deep way into these issues, because that's what readers want to do when they read a novel. They want something that takes them away in a deep way. And so I keep trying with each book. Now I'm writing book 3 of the series to get better and better at that. And but I love the challenge of it. It's fascinating work, and I'm very grateful for to be working on it, to be doing it. And if there's anybody there who's wants to try fiction, I would, and you love to read it, love it, I would encourage you to give it a try.
Well, you're a reader too, so that helped you to know what you like in books. You asked about life-changing books, and I think we had a couple of responses in the chat. We've had a very active chat, so I'm having to go through a lot. People like the Father Brown, the short stories. Now, the stories are a little different than the series. The series is based on character from those books.
Somebody just asked, how do I balance the 2 platforms, a nonfiction and fiction platform? And I did have to refresh my website and to try to figure out how to say I'm doing 2 different things. And so I finally just came up with a very short phrase that says, has my name, and then it says writing, faith, and mystery. And then, I say I write at the intersection of faith and race. And Cindy, I had always been doing that, but it wasn't until I wrote a novel that I found some language to say it. And so I haven't had anybody say that's confusing to them. And so, the challenge of having to drill down and really get clear on what I'm trying to do as a writer was a good exercise for me. So if some other kind of opportunity comes along that's kind of outside of that, I can say that's not what I do. I'm writing about the faith, the mystery of faith, and how that intersects with race. Those have been big things for me. Now, I also contribute to our Daily Bread ministry. So that's devotional writing. But in the same way, we are with each devotional digging into the scriptures to invite people to engage with a story or with a passage or a psalm or something. We share an illustration and then share the Bible passage that applies to it, and then help people dig into the mystery of all of that. And so I, for each person on this call, as you know exactly who you are and what arena the Lord's inviting you into to share, then you can really dig into that and hopefully with the Lord's help do some good work for the kingdom, because each one of us has that little piece that the Lord has set aside, that piece of work that He set aside for us to do. So when I talk about my racial background, I had wondered at first, well, is this going to be a turnoff for people or hard for people to hear? But your story is your story, and whatever it is. And as we lean into it, that my story isn't somebody else's, but whatever yours is, as you lean into it and share it with the world. There'll be a lesson in that for everybody. So
Good. That's the wonderful way to wrap up. And I love that you have that focus that when you said that, if something else comes up and it's not what I do, then I know, that's not something that maybe will distract me or something that I should be going off on. I'm keeping, it could be different, like you said, in the devotionals or fiction, but you've still got a message, and that's your focus. I think that's a very good point. We did have one other question, but it's time for us to move on. But it was just asking about if you could address real quick how you got started writing devotionals.
Oh, writing devotionals. I mentioned that the freelance work that I always done. The first freelance piece I ever wrote was for I'll think of the name of the publication in just a second. But even when I was working as a journalist, I was always trying to, here's my answer. I was always trying to sell my writing somewhere else. I just wanted to see if I could do that. And so at the same time, I loved reading daily devotionals. My husband and I would read the 1-year devotionals that Tyndale publishes, the 1-year brand of devotionals and Bibles. And so when I started, I wrote a book for Tyndale on prayer memoir. And they would give their authors gifts. I didn't mean this to be a long answer, but this is the answer. And so they gave me a Bible called, a lot of those gifts were Bibles, and one was called a 1-year NLT study Bible. And it took me 2 years to read through it. But when I was reading through it, I was taking all these notes on the virtues that God blessed. And finally I said, wow, I could do a book on this. I have enough notes here for it to be a book. And I proposed that to them, that I write this devotional. And so they accepted the proposal, and I wrote a 1-year devotional for them called God's Great Blessings. And it's on the virtues that God blesses. And so part of that came from loving to read devotionals. And then I wanted to try to write them. And I had not written them before, but I had been a reader of them. So I wrote my, proposal. My book proposal had probably 10 or 15 sample devotionals. And that was enough to get the book contract. And then, I ended up also now, as I said, by God's grace, working for Our Daily Bread. So I think, Anne Lamott says writing is paying attention. And so when these doors open, if we're paying attention, then we can walk into them. A friend of mine who writes for Our Daily Bread asked me, would I like to be one of their contributors? And I had to when she said that to me, I thank God that I knew enough to take the time and think about what that could mean. And so I said yes. And then there was this big, long process. I had to write a ton of samples for them, and their review committee had to approve them. And there's a lot of things that had to happen before they finally said yes. But I love the work very much.
Well,
And
I'm glad that they said yes, so that we have those writing out there from you.
Thank you.
And I just want to remind everybody that Patricia's books are in our online bookstore, and that link is in the chat and also on our website, ffbookfestival.com. And thank you so much, Patricia. I know that we've gotten lots of thank yous and people that really appreciate it in the chat.
Thank you, everybody, so much. I hope something was said, done, or sung, or what that inspired, and you're writing and you're reading. Thank you so much.